Hello everyone, welcome to a series of Fruitful Events. My name is Hazel Berry, and this series is a series in which I discuss my wellness journey and all of the fruitful things that I've learned that could be a benefit to you. Thank you for coming back and joining me for another episode. Now, this episode, we'll be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is love, but also fear. We aren't just going to have a slumber party and talk about boys and feelings. No, no, no. It's never that simple. Today, we're not just going to talk about all the forms of love that I've experienced in my life, but also use it as an opportunity to reflect on the kind of love that you've experienced in your lifetime. There's a couple forms of love that I've experienced in my life that I kind of want to dissect and talk about and share with you guys if that's all right with y'all. I kind of want to dissect what roles that love played in my life and in my wellness journey, and the beauty of platonic love, as well as how romantic love has affected my journey specifically. Part one: what role does love and fear play into my wellness journey? So I would like to make a disclaimer that this episode is, as is every episode prior to this as well, is mainly going to be about my specific experiences with love and fear. And you're more than welcome to take this as an opportunity to self-examine your journey and your relationship to love and fear, and take what resonates and leave what doesn't. In the context of the last 6 years of my life, I had to redefine the role that love played in my life. And I say this because if we're being honest, love, like fear, is one of the two driving motivations that we can use to live our lives the way that we do. Let's say if you were to operate from a place of fear, you can find that what can happen is that you can experience kind of a lack mentality that kind of makes it harder for you to navigate life with such a limited viewpoint. But then on the other side of that, if you operate from a place of love, you can find that you see the abundance that life has to offer, but you can also recognize that too much of that kind of mentality can make you susceptible to people who are advantageous. Now, I'm very aware that I sound like every spiritual person on your FYP page on the TikTok machine, but there is merit to this ideology. I'm not going to hold you. With what I've learned in the last 6 years of my life, I've learned a lot about what comes with these two sides of the same coin, with love and with fear, and how I've seen firsthand how having each of these viewpoints can really shape the reality that you're living. Now, I'm not out here saying that you should live strictly with one viewpoint over the other. Like, you shouldn't strictly live out of fear, or you shouldn't live strictly out of just purely love. I can see how, in order to have a full experience in life, you have to recognize that there's going to be both in your everyday life that show up. Let's unpack how love and fear have played a role in my wellness journey. Years ago, when I was working in the drag community, I had this belief that if I were to come to terms with or interact with any capacity to my gender dysphoria that I was dealing with, I would end up losing the appeal of what my drag persona offers to the world, because I felt that people would begin to just see how similarly my persona as Hazel is to me outside of drag, or that I would think that people would have a hard time making the distinction between the two. And this is just a prime example of me explaining how I lived in a form of fear. But if we were to take the other side of that coin and look at the context of love and how I've operated in that way, I found that I had so much to give to people who I felt needed it. And I thought that if I loved people hard enough, that it can influence and shape their lives in a positive way. But see, the issue with that is that I failed to understand how boundaries worked, and the power of communication, and tying it back to a previous episode that we had before, how understanding my role in someone's life and them understanding what theirs is in mine is key to having a fully realized relationship. If I were to wrap it up in a bow, I was fearful of being myself and coming to terms with who it is I knew myself to be. And I was afraid of the risk that would come with all of that. And I was willing to use distractions and other coping mechanisms and allocate the love that I should have been giving into myself to other things. Now, before I continue, I actually want to share something very intimate with you guys. I don't know if any of you out there are familiar with what maladaptive daydreaming is, but it's essentially excessive daydreaming to the point where you're creating realities and storylines in your mind while also being detached mentally and emotionally and maybe even like physically in a way from your present waking life. Now, what does this have to do with love and fear and how it shaped my wellness journey? I'm not going to hold you. The fear of living my life authentically has driven me to spend almost 3/4 of my life in this maladaptive world that I created in my mind. And I used it to essentially experience my life as a woman in another reality that isn't this one. And I also used this world that I was in to experience love in the way that I have consumed from media over the years into this world that I've created. I would also create roles and stories of other women who experienced strife but found love in odd yet beautiful ways. Because I made it up in my mind and internalized in my mind that I couldn't live authentically in my waking life, I put all the love and care and energy that could have gone into just simply living my life authentically into daydreams and fallacies in my mind and a completely different reality that isn't tangible to the one that we're living in right now. And it's funny because it's why when we look back at the first episode of Fruitful Events, you can now understand why I fell in limerence with someone back in 2018. Now, limerence, to reiterate to y'all, because I realized that I never gave context to the definition of it in the very first episode, is the state of being infatuated or obsessed with another person, typically experienced involuntarily and characterized by a strong desire for reciprocation of one's feelings, but not primarily for a sexual relationship. And this is important to note because this is a theme that I'll explore further down the line with this specific episode. Because I've lived, if not almost all of my life, up until a couple of years ago anyway, in this maladaptive world that I've created in my mind, it framed the way that I interacted with love in my life. However, you can see that this is a double-edged sword because I also experienced fear just as much as I was experiencing love, but putting it and compartmentalizing it somewhere else. It was easier to live the life that I wanted to live in my mind, more so than it was to ever put myself in a position to actually live my life in reality. When I say this is obviously a very sad realization to have come to. And the thing is, I realized years ago, after discovering what maladaptive daydreaming was, that I also discovered I wasn't the only trans person to experience this exact thing. I actually found a forum on Reddit that showed just how many trans people were experiencing this exact thing and living in their own bubbles and afraid to live their lives radically. I realized that I had chosen fear up until that point in my life, up until I came out as trans in 2022. And this is a very scary realization to have. But despite all of that, I was able to, with all my faculties and all the resources that I had and all the therapy that I've gone through, find a way to access this information and now use it to live my life as radically as I can, and do so in every step of the journey that I'm going through in real time with you guys right now. In a roundabout way, fear was useful because it taught me how if I veer too far into fear, it can quite literally cost me my life. And if I chose love, especially when it matters in the context that it should matter, I can find that I can use that as well to live my life wholly. Part 2, the beauty of platonic love. I haven't really shied away from talking about how I've had codependent relationships in my life, especially in my teenage years and in my early 20s. And now that you also know that I pretty much lived a good chunk of my life in La La Land, I realized, how was I ever going to experience love if all I have ever known for most of my life is fear? In order for me to be able to figure this out, I started with unpacking why I was codependent in the first place. And I realized it's because I genuinely did not know how to stand on my own feet. I did not know how to be my own individual person and love myself enough to be that independent individual person. And adding to the fact that I also struggle with ADHD, I also operated from a place of fear in that I've internalized over the years that I cannot bring myself to do or live life in the same way that other people do independently, in the way that I feel I should be doing. Honestly, I'm not going to hold you, it's awful. And the combination of all these things that I just mentioned led to this belief that ultimately I did not feel I was enough. And that is a very sad thought to have about yourself. If I were to be honest, I learned how to find love through the friendships I had. And that helped me understand the power of also loving myself in return. In my culture as a Filipino, a lot of Filipinos believe in operating from a place of humility. However, this mentality can also lead people into believing that if you were to own how great of a person you are, or how skilled you can be at something, or how talented you are, or how beautiful you believe yourself to be, it comes across as not being humble, but in fact arrogant. I believe that this couldn't be further from the truth. In order to have enough love to live a full life, you have to take ownership and pride of the love you have for yourself and the people around you. And that is why it's so empowering when you have a support system like the previous episode that reflects to you the beauty of how transformative radical love can be. Love can be a tool that you can use to not just understand yourself, but also understand the people around you. After having enough codependent relationships in my life, I chose to befriend people who I felt had qualities that I didn't have, and surround myself with those people and have them be able to help me find the qualities they had within myself and be able to put that out into the world. I also found that having people that could hold me accountable and gave me a sense of what boundaries looked like brought me to this reality that I'm just as capable of love as I am wickedness and fear. And being able to understand that helped me take ownership of how I choose to nurture the relationships around me. When you have friends or family or anyone really that invades your space and does not respect your boundaries, that does not communicate efficiently, or are comfortable enough with themselves to know how they can hurt you, it's really hard to figure out what love really looks like. Even when love does end up showing up in your life. Part 3, and the most juiciest part of this entire episode, the one that I know y'all been waiting for. How has romantic love affected my journey? Remember a good Judy Limerence? Well, she's back again to rear her ugly head. Now, I've always had crushes throughout my life, but what stood out to me when I did a little bit of introspection for this episode is that they were always one-sided. They were always relationships I knew were never going to amount to anything or really go anywhere and match up to the gravitas that I created in my mind of how love should be. And these fantasies I made in my head would never really amount to the possibility of me experiencing it in real life until I fell in limerence with someone. I will spare the details that came from that journey with this person, but what I can say is that I never knew I could experience love from someone that could potentially give me the chance to be loved until I met that person. And when this person came, and the feeling also came, I didn't want to lose it. And the thing is, when the boundaries were set, when the communication was made evidently clear that they did not want to be with me, I didn't take no for an answer. And to make a very long story short, it distorted my reality. To make a very, very long story short, I say this not to try and ask for pity or like be dramatic, I guess, but to kind of remind you again that when you operate from a place of fear, it can lead to destruction and the livelihood that you have for yourself. Once I had the language to identify what limerence was and that I was experiencing it, I knew I needed to unpack why it was that I was experiencing this. And when I look back, it was quite simple. Remember how I mentioned a couple episodes ago how we use what's in our arsenal to live our lives the way that we do? I did not think I could ever truly experience love. So when the opportunity came for me to realize I could have it in my life, I ended up using limerence. And I realized over time that limerence was just a maladaptive coping mechanism. To put it into layman's terms, your girl was so far into La La Land with maladaptive daydreaming that when something potentially real came, and even if it wasn't actually a real, authentic, official relationship that ended up manifesting, I still did not have the means or the tools to give love that was real and grounded in reality. I saw a TikTok once, which I'll put the link in the bio to, how limerence is essentially a desire to fulfill a human need that every human being has, which is the desire to be loved. And the love I gave into the characters and the stories that I made in the world that I created whenever I maladaptive daydreamt, I could not give to myself because I did not know how to. So over time, when I found my support system, I was able to use them to help me understand how to have love in a real, authentic way. And I did this work so then that way, when I do potentially fall in love with someone, I'm working with the reality of our situation and finding ways to communicate efficiently when it matters and find a way to hold each other accountable, especially myself, and understand that while we have the baggage that we do when we come into the relationship that we'll end up having to address at some point, we would figure out together how to cross those bridges when we do, because we want to be together, you know? Now to the public, y'all should know, I've never had a boyfriend in this lifetime. And I used to think that that was a weakness of mine, and that because I never had an official experience with someone that had an actual label, I was never going to be able to be equipped enough to know how to handle love when love arrived. And I realized that the failures, even in the situationships I ended up in, and the things I learned in those situationships, and in times that I've fallen in limerence with people, and how it's brought me to the awareness that I wasn't living my life wholly, it really impacted how I could heal from that point. Knowing what I knew, I used it to be able to find a way to get out of the situations I was in and get myself to a place where I could live openly and radically and presently and just out here. You know what I mean? As I was making this video, I kind of made the realization that um, to whoever my boyfriend is in the future, or to whoever I end up being with in whatever capacity after this, they're going to be able to experience a version of me that is healthy, present, aware, and happy with who they are, and all of the things that I have to offer to that person. And I can also see that all the love that I felt I've wanted to finally give someone, I can. And it's because I love myself enough to know that I deserve it and that I can be able to have it. And I deserve to have love in my life just as much as the next person. And while I'll feel he'll be lucky to experience me, because he will, I'll also be lucky enough to experience giving that love to him in an authentic, grounded, healthy way. And I'll be able to put myself in a position to be able to receive the exact same thing. I'm still a work in progress, but the fact that I'm open enough to let love into myself has allowed me to realize I can discover what love truly is like and use it to give it back to the world. And that concludes this episode. So thank you guys for tuning in. I love every single one of y'all that take the time to follow me on this journey. I know I am very serious when I make these videos because a lot of the subject matter is very serious, but I just really feel that doing this work can allow me to put myself out there and share the side of me, but also eventually get to the fun parts that I want to share with you guys eventually. But this project is very near and dear to me, and I feel that I can really contribute to my artistry in a way once I get to the end of this road. And I hope that you guys continue to stay with me as I go through this journey with you, and love y'all down. And I mean it. And until next time, stay juicy.